Beaver, you've been at this for quite some time now. When did you first get into it?
Oh, back in 1977, met up with a guy named Gary Shear with Lone Star Hang Gliders in Dallas, Texas. They were doing the hang gliding, and that was my beginning. Was in the early days of the hang gliding.
Now, were you supplying parts or pieces, or were you just a hang glider pilot?
No, at the time I was just an enthusiast, and then that was back in the late 70s, and I decided that this is something that I wanted to do, and if there was a way that I can make money at it to support my habit, that's what I wanted to do. And so we got involved in the sales and marketing and the flight instruction part of it. And that was the beginning. It was more of a hobby that was paying for itself, and it just kept on.
What aircraft were you using back in the early days?
Back then it was Quicksilver. I was always using the Quicksilver airplanes. We were using the Quicksilver Hang Gliders. I think when I first got started with the Quicksilvers, they were just getting into the fixed wing. Steve Wilson was the owner at the time, and if I'm not mistaken, the way that it worked is Steve had got the company from Dick Iper. And that's where the iPerformance came from, and Steve eventually sold it to Lyle Byrum, and that's when it really got traction, was when Lyle Byrum took over the company.
Now, they originally started out with the hang gliders, and then they started with the Quickie, I believe it was called after.
They called it the B model, is what it was. That was the original name, was the B model, because it had a tail. It was a planform wing, and it had a tail, which was kind of unique for a hang glider, but it also made it real stable, and it was easy for the guys to run down the hill with the tail, because they wasn't reliant so much on just pure weight shift.
They had a set of ropes or cables going from the back of the...
Right. It was there were lines that were attached to the harness to the around the waist area of the pilot, and when you swung your body to the right, then the rudder followed with that motion, and then you made a turn to the right. So it was kind of rudder assisted weight shift back then.
Now, how long would it take to build one of those airplanes?
Oh gosh, we'd put one of those together in a day. Back then, it was just a handful of bolts, some tubing, and those airplanes were just put together it was just a minor assembly at that time. You got to remember, there wasn't any motors or any of that complexity. It was just some aluminum, just a few pieces of aluminum tubing and some ribs and some fabric, and it was pretty simple.
Now, were you working in Louisiana at that time?
I've been in Louisiana. I've never left Louisiana. When I got exposed to it, we would have to drive to Heavener, Oklahoma, and there were some little bunny hills in Dallas at the time. I think there were no more than just levees that we would run down the levees. But for the hang gliding, we would drive all the way to Heavener, Oklahoma, to I'm not sure of Buffalo Mountain was the name of the mountain.
And then they started to put engines on these things. The little Yamaha, I believe, was...
Well, the first motor was way back when, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, that was the twin one.
Yeah, with Sweeney was a gentleman's name. I don't quite remember his first name, but it was Sweeney. The name of the company was Gemini, if I'm not mistaken, Dave. And he attached the little twin engines on the tri-bar of the thing, and it was, if I'm not mistaken, it was 6 horsepower each motor at the time, and it was a purely run with it to get launched, and that was the beginning. Was the Sweeney, when Sweeney put those systems on there.
And then where did they go from there? And how did Quicksilver start changing all this?
Well, it was right about that time. That was when Lyle Byrum got involved. Lyle was a Cessna dealer in Midland, Texas. And he was a very successful Cessna dealer. He owned Cessna Pilot Centers, I think is what they called them. And he saw the Quicksilver, and he decided, just like the guy with the razors, he bought the company, and he had some substantial backing behind him. And he applied the Cessna mentality, I guess, if you will, to the manufacturing of the airplanes. And once he got that process set up, then the evolution, if you will, that's how that started. And I guess that was in the That was in the late 70s, 79, I'm guessing. 78, 79 was when he took over.
Now, when did they start with the Yamahas then?
The Yamaha, well, first we had, right after, what really took, when the Quicksilver factory started putting motors on the plane. When they started putting motors on the plane, it was Yamaha. Before that, we would just buy the airframe, the hang glider, if you will, from Quicksilver, and then we would use different engine packages. There was a gentleman named Bill Adaska in Duncanville, Texas.
Yeah,
that was
Rotec Rally.
the Rotec. Yeah, well, that eventually became the Rotec Rally, and then Jack Hutchison in Florida had the what he called the Hutch Pack at the time, and he was using the Chrysler West Bend originally. And then he eventually went to the McCulloughs. Now, when Quicksilver first started, hang on, let me make a correction here. When Quicksilver first started, they were using the Chrysler West Bends also.
Mm-hmm. They were tying two of them together.
And then that was the beginning of the double quick, if you will, when you had two motors put together.
A lot like having two wives living together.
Yeah, they were fighting all the time. It was just it didn't. And then eventually the Yamaha package came into play, the KT100S. Now, there's still a lot of those still flying today, but the Yamaha KT100S engine was a real reliable package. It was readily available. It was from the go-kart industry, and it was a readily available engine. And that's what when he started his mass marketing, if you will, and his mass production, that was the engine that he chose.
Yeah. And he went to the reduction drive then at that
The
time,
reduction
too.
drive, it was a belt drive. Originally, it had a clutch on the back of the engine, which made it real easy to start. And got rid of a lot of the vibrations and the inherent problems that we have with the two-stroke engines. But that package was the engine was mounted right on just behind the CG of the plane, which gave it real good handling characteristics. And it was not unusual; it was very common to get some altitude and then shut the motor off and fly the plane the way it was originally intended. Except with landing on your feet, you landed on the wheels, which was a kind of a
Yeah, because we were at Sun and Fun, and they were pulling just about everything off of these airplanes to make them 254 pounds.
Well, yeah, back then the weight of the plane was 165.
Yeah, and they had to be foot launchable.
Right, and that was one of the criteria. It had to be foot launchable, and boy, I tell you, those days I really don't miss them. It was kind of like if you could survive, you could fly, but. That was all part of the evolution of the industry, and that was really and truly it. It was the grassroots.
Now, when Lyle got into it, and he brought the Cessna, as you say, mentality into it, he really kicked us in that he came up with a package that no one else in the industry had. I mean, you had every bubble pack.
What Lyle did, and this is really a brilliant thing that he did, is he designed the plane to where it could be assembled by the end user, and that was where it really shined. So in the manufacturing of the product, in the design, because he had a full engineering team, he had a drafting team, he had just a full team there, where when the customer got the kit, all of the parts were blister board onto the packs, so you could do easy inventory. And what that did is that eliminated I didn't get this part or I didn't get that part. All the parts were blistered onto the board, and the assembly of the airplane was straightforward and very simple. And they provided, and still I think today they provided, at the time back then, were just state-of-the-art assembly instructions and the backup. We had a severe dealer program, very good dealer program, and that's what made the company. It was the people.
And not only they had the assembly manuals, but they also had a training manual. They had a manual for when you took it apart in the field.
They had Dave. They had the assembly manual. They had the flight manual, which was a training manual. All of the dealers had a Quicksilver training system. It was a series of slides. It was back when we had the old slides and the cassette tapes that you played for the audio. They had the owner's manual, which was a unique manual to have, where the customer would have an owner's manual which told them how to take care of it and how to store it and how to assemble it and how to disassemble it. And
And all the maintenance.
and all of the maintenance stuff. It was just a.
Yeah, we'd never heard of anything like that before.
Well, that was, back then. I mean, even the motorcycle industry didn't even have that. It was that was state of the art. I mean, it was brilliance on his part when he did it, and it worked. Dave, back then they were producing, oh gosh, they were doing upwards to 200 kits a month. 200 kits a month. We were selling, my company was selling, to do, for us to sell 150 to 200 airplanes a year was not uncommon at the time. I mean, it was really in its heyday.
Now, when did they first come out then and do the design changes, going from the weight shift to the two-axis Quicksilver?
That was done again, and I don't remember the year. I'm thinking it was in 80 or 81. That was first introduced. Jack Hutchison did that, as a matter of fact, and he introduced that at air show fly-in that was at Tullahoma, Tennessee, and that had to be in 80, either 80 or 81. And what he did is he had a seat with a control stick, to where you didn't have to use your weight shift anymore. It had more of a conventional feel to it, although it was only two-axis control. It was the one stick controlled the elevator and the rudder, and there were no ailerons at the time because of the inherent dihedral of the wing. But that was a big step. That was a big step for the factory when they did that. Now that also added to the price a little bit, and then we moved to the next engine, which was the Cuyuna back then, the 430 Cuyuna. Fellow named Roger Worth was his name, got involved. He at the time he owned the Cuyuna factory, and he introduced this twin cylinder engine. I think it was from the snowmobile world, and that was another milestone in the company's history, was when they went with the bigger engine.
And then after that, they come up with the two-place.
Yeah, you just keep wondering what's next in all of this. But the two-place was a really unique thing because, and you were doing it yourself back then. When we taught somebody to fly, we were teaching them to fly.
We were using initially paddles.
Yeah.
We were on a strip and we just had two paddles.
Yeah.
And I used to lift one for the throttle and one for the stick position.
Right. So it was a kind of a unique way to train because me being the instructor, I stayed on the ground, and so the student would run back and forth, up and down the runway through a series of exercises that he would do, and it was it worked well. I taught hundreds of people how to fly like that with me sitting on the ground.
And you did it very quickly too. It wasn't like you were taking 15 or 20 hours to do it.
There were no instruments involved. There wasn't even an airspeed involved back then. It was all absolute seat of the pants flying, flying in its purest form. And it was a very invigorating and a very satisfying way to fly because you were literally flying the airplane. You weren't flying a dashboard. You weren't flying a cockpit, and that's when more of the pilots started getting involved in it. And the pilots it was actually the pilots that started demanding side-by-side training or some kind of hands-on training where they wanted the instructor in the plane at the time. And so it was just one more milestone that Lyle and his engineers got together, and they came up with the side-by-side seating, which I think is the absolute best way to do any kind of flight instruction, where you can have eye-to-eye contact with your student. And that started off with a very low-powered engine at the time. It was literally the Quicksilver MX with 2 seats and a little bit beefier wing, and that was about the extent of it.
You were still using the old 430 Cuyuna and you just run her full power all the time.
Man, I'll tell you what, we didn't even, you really didn't even need a throttle. All you needed was a switch. That was just full throttle or off, one of the two, because there was none of the, and your students had to be a certain weight and size. It was quite an interesting time to be in aviation back then.
And then about a year later, they started with the Rotax. I think it was 82.
Rotax, actually it was a gentleman named Dale Kelson, who was building the Territorn, and who is now the owner of Warp Drive Prop. But it was Dale Kelson that got a twin cylinder Rotax. It's a snowmobile engine, from what I can understand, And Dale brought that Rotax engine out, and it was clean, and it was simple, and a lot of people understood him, and it was newer technology. It was newer two-stroke technology that came in. And then once that got some traction with that engine, I can't remember the guy, the Canadian that got involved, who was the distributor. At any rate, once Rotax got involved in it, that was it. You know, we had the 377, and then they brought out the 503, and all they had to offer at the time was just the air-cooled engines. But the 503 was so much more power than the 447 that we thought this is it. You know, we've got all the motor we'll ever need, we'll ever use. You know, we'll never go to any more than that. I think the bigger development was when they came out with a good, reliable reduction drive system, which was belts. They had the small pulley and the big pulley with the 4 belts, and I think that was another one of their little milestones that they came up with, was getting that system to work.
Ron Shetler was the guy's name.
Ron Shetler, yeah, Ron Shetler. A very, very interesting fella, because he was very open-minded. He spent a lot of time in the fields with the guys. They did a lot of work with exhaust systems, and to where the whole thing was a tuned package. And that was another thing that was kind of unique to the industry. Was one box contained all the engine. It contained the carburetors, the ignition system, the fuel pump, the exhaust. He worked with a lot of the manufacturers on mounting. He worked on with Ron was a very instrumental part of this industry getting going, because he was the one that brought the Rotax engine to the industry.
Yeah, and he dealt basically strictly with the factory, so that it was a matter of, you had a problem, he relayed that problem, and he was instrumental in bringing the gearboxes in too.
Right, the old A box,
yeah.
And that was a new thing, and that was, you know, then again another milestone came into play when the belts, with its complexities, although very functional, we eliminated all of the complexities, not complexities, but the moving parts of the belt system. But what that did mean is we had to move the engine to the back of the wing, and that was not necessarily a ideal thing, because then we're starting to spread the weight around on the plane, and we put the motor on top of the wing, which is ideally not the ideal place, you know, from purely an aeronautical design point of view. It's up in your low pressure and drag thing, but the gearbox was just seemed like a godsend at the time, you know, to have that come out.
And then Quicksilver came on to hard times.
Yeah, it seemed to be. What happened was there was a flood that went through the factory, but it was water went through the factory and destroyed all of the file cabinets, all of the documentation, all of the paperwork, destroyed all of the inventory, because it was just everything went underwater for a while, and they just had a hard time. They had a hard time getting back on top of that. That was a real tough lick for them, and that was out of that era is when Lyle was. He relinquished ownership of the company to another gentleman named Ken Strong, who did a valiant effort to try to get it going, but it just had a hard time getting past that getting past that blow of just losing everything, all of your documentation, all of your manual, just losing everything. He had a hard time, but Ken eventually took it over, and he gave it a valiant shot to get it going.
Actually, wasn't there something about a television show?
Yeah, that was, thinking about that now, that was back in, I'm going to say 84, 85 is when that happened. 60 Minutes did a show of a reporter that was in a aircraft. It was a converted hang glider at the time.
That was a dactyl.
Yeah, it was a DAC, yeah, the old pterodactyl. And one of the things that they did is they threw caution to the wind, although at that time there wasn't any throwing caution to the wind. We didn't know that we would. It was just a whole new thing. But this reporter got into the airplane and decided he was going to fly it, and he didn't need any training, because I didn't know if he was a pilot or what happened. But the man, the flight ended up in a fatality, and 60 Minutes played that over and over and over, and everybody and their next door neighbors saw that, and then all of a sudden, The sport of powered hang gliding is what we were called back then. Power hang gliding, microlights, we had different names that we were called. The sport really took a hit by that because of the perceived danger, the perceived unbridled safety mechanism for this type of industry, and it really took a hit. We all took a hit back then, and Quicksilver sales went way down. But what Lyle did in an effort to try to save that, because he had an engineering staff, he had a design team, he had a group that could write technical manuals. He got involved in building four-wheeled vehicles, similar to what today they call the Honda Odyssey. Sand racers is what they did. So he kind of went towards that era of four-wheel drive racing in the desert, and I think that kind of held him on for just a little bit, just so he can stay active, so he can keep his employees working. Although he had a reduced staff, but he kept his engineers stayed on board, his key people stayed on board, and he got through that. It was a bad time for the industry. As a matter of fact, that's the only time of the end of my whole time being involved in this sport that I actually got out of it myself for a little while. Not completely. I was still teaching, and we were still involved in servicing the customers and the parts. But I got out of it myself for a little while and went back to construction. But not long after that, I'm 87, 88ish. I'm thinking late 86.
When did they introduce the GT400?
The GT400 was introduced in 1982. It was designed in '82. And that airplane came out, and what happened with the GT400, Dave, is it was ahead of its time. It was a very unique piece of equipment that was designed from the ground up. Dave Cronk and Tom Price were the brainchilds behind that airplane, and that was brought out in 1982. And the downside to that airplane at the time was, because it was ahead of its time, it was more expensive than what the MX line of planes were selling for. So sales of that airplane were not real brisk. Although it was a great flying airplane, it was originally sold with the Rotax 277. It was called the GT280 at the time. But it was a real sleeper. There was some selling, but it was a real sleeper. And then, today that airplane is still exactly the way it was for the most part. There's been little subtle changes as it was designed back in 1982.
So how did they get into the 500 series then?
The 500 came about when we had the two-place airplane. We had the two-place airplane for the MX line, and it was just one more progression for them to offer flight instruction in the GT line. And the GT500 is essentially the same airplane as the 400. But it's got another seat added in the back where the fuel tank normally was. They just added another seat back there, beefed up the frame, made the wing a little bit stouter, but it's essentially the same. It's the same airplane.
They spent a pile of money getting that through certification and stuff.
Yeah, when there was when the recreational pilot came along, and I'm not quite sure what all of that was called. It was a sport. Anyway, they could use that airplane for flight instruction, primary category, I think, or something like that. I don't remember the thing, but he spent close to $1 million going through the FAA criteria that was required to meet that standard. And at the time, the GT500 was the only airplane that qualified for that status. And what that did for us, we were able to sell an airplane that a CFI could use to give flight instruction and charge for it. So that was the first commercialization, if you will, of these types of bolt-together airplanes. That went off real well. Of course, sales never followed the plan, but because of the documentation and because of the mindset that was put into place, that opened a lot of doors for Quicksilver. That's when a lot of the Hollywood got involved, and some of the bigger names in aviation started looking at Quicksilver because they complied with all of the paperwork, if you will, that everybody else had to comply with. Although not as stringent, it was still a monumental amount of paperwork and engineering that they had to prove to the FAA. that amount of money that they spent was never to ever be caught back. I don't think.
Now, when did they get into putting new clothes on the older girl, the Quicksilver line? Did it come out with the Sprint and the MXL and all that?
Well, that was the advent when 60 Minutes did that, when the guy fell out of the airplane. The company went through a name change. It was iPerformance, and then it changed. The original name was iPerformance, which was a play on Dick Iper's name. Then it went into Iper Aircraft, if I'm not mistaken. It was Iper Aircraft, and that's the little name change that they did was the MX Sprint, which was the single surface wing, and then the MX Sport, which was a double surface wing. And then the wings got shorter, ailerons were added, it was more conventional 3-axis control. And a lot of that had to do with the attorneys. This is when the attorneys really got involved in the industry. And conventional general aviation type aircraft all had ailerons, they all had rudder pedals, and so therefore, if you wanted to compete in the market, you had to do what the market did. And that was in the 86, I believe, Dave, is when that came through. To this day, still manufacturing the GT400, almost identical to the way it was originally done. They're still manufacturing the Sprint and Sport line, almost identical to the way that they were originally done. The two-place side-by-side wire-braced airplanes, the MXL Sport and the MX Sprint 2, that was the 2 line. It's the same airplane. It's the same airplane. The motor's on top right now on the two-place airplane. That was changed in 1992 when they went from the single king post to the dual king post and put the motor up on top. But that line is the same airplane, and that's the beauty of the whole thing, and that's why I enjoy my association with that, because it's the exact same thing, and it's low and slow. They did introduce an airplane that was in the works for a long time, even back when Lyle Byrum had the company, which was just a strut brace configuration of the side-by-side airplanes. Good, reliable, kind of like the old 73 Chevy truck. It's just a good old reliable piece of equipment. And
the other thing is you can do so much with it. I mean, though you're on wheels right now, and a lot of people don't just fly on wheels.
No, well, I'm down here in South Louisiana, and I've never seen snow, but I understand that flying on snow and ice with these airplanes is just a phenomenal experience. The open cockpit, although these guys are flying, like you and I were talking earlier, these guys are flying in temperatures that are colder than what my freezer is. But we've got the skis, which are flying on snow and ice. We've got the floats. The float flying is just with a side-by-side open cockpit airplane. That type of float flying is just the purest sense of three-dimensional movement that I'll ever be able to come to. So, with all of the diversity that we have, and that's a big part of my company, is we don't make the plane. We have adaptations which make the plane better. So the wheels, the skis, and the floats just truly make it an all-terrain type of a vehicle.
And you do have windshields and stuff like that. And
limited amount of wind blockage that we offer. Again, me being down here in South Louisiana where it never gets cold. We're not really interested in the enclosed cockpit. I own several different antique classic aircraft myself, so I have all these enclosed airplanes if I want to go fly that, but I don't even fly them anymore. I like the side-by-side open cockpit nature. We have a Lexan thing that we call a bubble that we put in front of the airplane for the guys in the colder weather, but it's still all clear. There's no enclosed feeling whatsoever, and that's the part of aviation where my heart is at. I think that's where I'll stay.
Now, I've visited a lot of people over the years. You are not a sort of backdoor garage facility here.
No, we've got this is a multi-million-dollar facility. I've been doing this for a long time. The facility that I'm at now is almost 20,000 square feet of space. We've got a huge hangar. I can put as many as 28 airplanes in the hangar. We've got a customer service area, the offices, where we all of my departments are located in those offices. All of the administrative part of this company is run by my wife Kim. She's really the brains behind the whole thing. Behind that, I have all of my shop space where we do all of the manufacturing. We manufacture several products strictly for the ultralight industry. This facility was built, designed by me, because I knew what I wanted. I knew what the customers want when they come to a place like this. I knew what I wanted on my work ethics and how we work. We try to keep everything neat, organized, and clean. So this whole facility was designed from the ground up. It was we poured the slab, we did the building, we did the insides. We've got all of our inner office networking is all done. We've got all of the manuals for all the I almost copied, if you will, copied the way Quicksilver's philosophy of doing business, of presenting the product to the customer. And I knew that if I was going to get in this business, or if I was going to stay in this business, I was going to get into it to provide the customer on what the customer wanted, and provide it in a manner that what he was accustomed to. So when somebody comes to our facility, we think we have something for everybody. I'm located on an airport. We have a 4,000-foot asphalt strip. It's just a short taxi from our hangar onto the runway there. So it's a full service facility. We offer GA instruction. We offer the ultralight instruction. We support pilot instruction. We do the repairs. We build from the ground up, whether it's an ultralight or a two-place ultralight, the fat ultralight, if you will. We do the experimental home builds. I have a very good working relationship with the FAA here in Louisiana. They're here quite a bit, and when they come and they say they're with the FAA and they're here to help me, they really and truly are, because I've got a great working relationship with them. Yeah, our facility, this isn't a backyard facility. It's quite a, it's over, I have a lot of money invested into it. So I'll be doing this for a while. And when people ask me if I own it, I say, well, it's me and the bank.
If somebody wanted to get more information on you, Beaver, how do they get a hold of you?
The best way to do it is we've got, I think we have a pretty impressive website. It's www.air, and then the little dash, TECH and INC, and it's .com. So it's our name with www, and then our phone number is 985-536-3994, and that phone rings here. It also it always rings here, and then after hours it's forwarded to another human being. So we try to have our phone answered most of the time. And we're here, golly, Dave, we're here from sun up to sundown, it seems like. The business part of it, the administrative part of the company is a 9 to 5 type of thing, Monday through Friday. But there's always seems to be somebody in the hangar working on their planes, or people working on their planes. So we're here, we're open, we're accessible, we're real transparent, and it's the guys that work for me, this is what they enjoy doing also. So I'm real blessed with the staff that I have, that we're able to offer that.